She was willing to do anything to save the only person who ever fought for her. He had everything, except peace with the past he inherited. What started as a dark deal turned into a journey of healing and discovery. When love and forgiveness intertwine, even the most unlikely destiny can bloom. Before you hear this heartfelt story of sacrifice, redemption, and unexpected love, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. The sun had barely risen when Lisa was already hunched over her sewing machine. Her calloused fingers moved precisely across the blue fabric, transforming yards of silk into a dress she would never wear. It was another one of those gala gowns that would make other women shine at parties she only heard about. The small house high in the Rocky Mountains of Aspen, Colorado, was her improvised studio and home, a space where she created beauty while fighting against the judgment of a provincial town that never forgave her solitary pregnancy. "Mom, I brought your coffee." Helen entered the room with a steaming cup. At 22, she carried in her brown eyes the same determination that had helped her mother survive abandonment. Her black hair was tied in a simple bun, and she dressed practically without the excess of the clothes she helped create. "Thank you, my love. I need to finish this dress by tomorrow. The mayor's daughter will wear it for her birthday." Lisa smiled, but Helen knew that smile. It was the same one her mother used when she needed to disguise the tiredness in her eyes, the weight on her curved back after hours at the sewing machine. "You should rest a little." "I'll rest when I deliver this dress and get paid." Lisa adjusted her glasses and resumed sewing. "How are the preparations for your move going?" Helen took a deep breath. She had been accepted to study business administration in New York City, a dream she had cultivated since high school. The small mountain town, with its stone-paved streets and European-style houses, could no longer contain her ambitions. "I found an apartment to share with a roommate. It's small but close to the university, and I already have an interview to work at a coffee shop." Lisa paused the rhythmic movement of the sewing machine's pedal. "Are you sure you need to work? With the money I've saved." "The money you've saved barely covers the first semester, Mom." Helen knelt beside her mother. "And you need to save for your medications. Or do you think I don't notice when you skip doses to economize?" An uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Lisa's heart condition was a subject they both avoided, a ticking time bomb they pretended to ignore while praying it would never detonate. "Doctors exaggerate," Lisa shrugged, resuming her sewing. "I'm fine like this." Helen knew there was no point in insisting. It had always been this way, her mother minimizing her own problems so that Helen could aim higher. Perhaps that's why Helen tried so hard. Each of her achievements was a way to honor that silent sacrifice. "I'll finish packing my things." Helen kissed her mother's forehead and left the room. In the small living room, the walls displayed her photos from different school phases, always with medals or certificates. It was the altar Lisa had built for her daughter, the concrete proof that she had overcome prejudice and raised a promising young woman despite the absence of a father. Helen stopped in front of the only photo where she appeared with a man. A faded image where, as a baby, she was in Edward's arms, her father. She knew the story from fragments she had managed to extract from her mother over the years. An intense romance, an unplanned pregnancy, and his choice of another woman. Wealthier, more connected to the traditional families in the region, more suitable in the eyes of conservative society. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her. "Thoughts?" "Helen, could you answer it? It must be Mrs. Mercedes for the final fitting of the dress." Helen opened the door, but instead of the pharmacist's wife, she found an elderly gentleman, impeccably dressed, who observed her with disconcerting intensity. "Can I help you?" asked Helen, intrigued. "You are." The man seemed to have seen a ghost. "Helen Miller, do you live here?" Helen nodded, suspicious. "Is your mother home?" he asked, adjusting his tie, visibly nervous. "Who would like to speak with her?" "Tell her that Anthony Davis would like to talk." The name meant nothing to Helen, but the man's urgent tone made her call her mother. When Lisa appeared in the living room and saw the visitor, her face turned so pale that Helen had never seen her mother look like that before. "What are you doing here?" Lisa's voice was almost a whisper. "We need to talk, Lisa. It's about Edward." Helen felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Edward, her father, a name rarely spoken in that house. "Helen, dear, could you excuse us?" asked Lisa, without taking her eyes off the visitor. "No, Mom, if it's about my father, I have the right to hear." Lisa hesitated but eventually agreed with a nod. The three sat in the small living room, a heavy silence hanging between them. "Edward suffered a stroke 3 days ago." Anthony went straight to the point. "The doctors don't know if he will survive." Lisa brought her hand to her chest, a gesture Helen knew well. It was how her mother dealt with intense emotions, pressing the spot where her heart beat irregularly. "Why have you come to tell us after so many years?" questioned Lisa. Anthony, who Helen now assumed was a relative of her father, took a deep breath. Because before losing consciousness, he asked to see his daughter. To see Helen. Helen's eyes burned, a knot formed in her throat. 22 years of absence, and now, on the verge of what could be the end, her father remembered her existence. "I won't go." Helen stood up, her hands trembling. "He had 22 years to meet me." "Helen," Lisa extended her hand to her daughter. "And what does his wife think about this?" Helen asked, staring at Anthony. "The woman he chose over my mother? Does she know he wants to see me?" "Cecilia and Edward separated 15 years ago," revealed Anthony. "He's been living alone since then." That revelation hit Helen like lightning. In her mind, she had constructed the image of a man living a perfect life with another family, while she and her mother struggled to survive. "Then why did he never look for us?" Helen's voice was choked with emotion. "Shame." Anthony lowered his gaze, and later, fear that it was too late. "Edward made the biggest mistake of his life when he abandoned you, and he spent the last 15 years paying for it." Lisa, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Where is he hospitalized?" "At Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City." A chill ran down Helen's spine. New York City. Exactly where she would be moving in less than a week. "This doesn't change any of my plans." Helen crossed her arms defensively. "I'm going to New York to study, not to meet a man who never wanted to see me." "Helen," Anthony took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Edward has built a considerable fortune in recent years. He owns Davis Properties. He wants you to know that you are entitled to a portion of that inheritance, regardless of whether you want to see him or not." Helen felt her blood boil. "Do you think you can buy his forgiveness or mine?" "It's not like that, dear," interjected Lisa. "But maybe—" "Don't even start, Mom," Helen interrupted. "I've spent my entire life watching you work yourself to death, saving every penny for my education, while he lived comfortably." Anthony placed the envelope on the table. "Here are all the details about the assets and also the contact. Information for the lawyer. Edward instructed that everything be done according to your wishes, Helen, without any pressure." He stood up. "His room is 507. The decision to visit him or not is entirely yours." After Anthony left, Helen collapsed on the sofa, tears finally escaping. "Why is he doing this now, Mom? Why wait until he's on the brink of—" "Perhaps because only now has he realized what truly matters," answered Lisa, sitting beside her daughter. Helen stared at the envelope on the table. Inside it was more than information about money. There was the past she had never known and a future she had never imagined possible. 3 days later, Helen was on the bus to New York City, departing a week earlier than planned. In her backpack, besides the few clothes and documents for enrollment, she carried the envelope Anthony had left. She hadn't opened it. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to refuse anything coming from the man who had abandoned them. Another part, however, thought of her mother, and how the money could provide the proper cardiac treatment she had always postponed due to lack of resources. The journey from Aspen to New York City took several hours, enough time for Helen to rethink her entire life. When the bus entered the largest metropolis in America, her heart raced. There was the city where she would realize her dream of studying business administration and where her father was fighting to survive in a hospital bed. Upon disembarking, at the Port Authority bus terminal, Helen checked the address of the small apartment she would share with Roberta, a colleague she had met online through a group of freshmen. She took the subway, and after a tense journey where she held her backpack against her chest in the crowded car, finally arrived at the simple building in Chinatown. The apartment was tiny, a combined living room and kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom she would share with Roberta. Her roommate, an extroverted young woman with colorful hair, was already waiting for her. "Welcome to the concrete jungle." Roberta hugged her, as if they were longtime friends. "I thought you were only coming next week. Change of plans." Helen forced a smile. "I needed to move some things up." "Great. This way you can go with me to the university welcome party tomorrow." Helen dropped her backpack on the twin bed against the wall. "Actually, I need to take care of something first. Do you know Mount Sinai Hospital?" Roberta frowned, concerned. "Did something happen?" "It's complicated." Helen sat on the bed. "My father is hospitalized there." In the hours that followed, Helen surprised herself by telling Roberta the whole story: the abandonment, life with her seamstress mother, Anthony's unexpected visit, the revelation about her father. It was strange how comfortable she felt sharing this with someone she had just met, when she had never talked about it with anyone in her hometown. "And will you see him?" asked Roberta after hearing everything. "I don't know." Helen stared at the still-sealed envelope in her hands. "On one hand, I want to throw in his face that I managed to get here without his help. On the other, you want to understand why he never looked for you." Helen nodded, feeling the tears return. "And there's my mother, too. She needs heart surgery that we could never afford. If this money could help her, then you have 2 reasons to go to the hospital tomorrow." Roberta took her phone. "I'll show you how to get there. It's relatively close to here." That night, Helen slept little. Her thoughts oscillated between the resentment accumulated over years and the curiosity to meet the man whose blood ran in her veins. In the morning, after a quick coffee prepared by Roberta, she made her decision. "I'm going to the hospital today. I want to resolve this before classes start." "Do you want me to go with you?" offered Roberta. "No, thank you. It's something I need to do alone." Mount Sinai Hospital was imposing, very different from the small municipal hospital in Aspen. Helen felt small as she passed through the automatic doors of the reception. Approaching the counter, she hesitated before speaking. "Good morning. I'm here to see Edward Davis, room 507. The receptionist typed something into the computer and looked at Helen with a serious expression. "Are you a relative?" I'm his daughter." "One moment, please." The receptionist made a quick call, and minutes later, Helen saw Anthony coming in her direction, looking even more tired than in Aspen. "Helen!" There was genuine relief in his voice. "You came." "I still haven't decided if I want to see him," Helen was honest. "But I needed to come here to make that decision." Anthony nodded understandingly. "Edward's situation is stable, but critical. The doctors managed to stabilize him, but he still hasn't woken up." "Does he know I'm here?" "No, he's in an induced coma." Anthony indicated the elevators. "But if you want to go up, I can take you to his room." Helen's heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to leap out of her chest. During the silent elevator ride, she thought of her mother. What would Lisa say if she were here? The last conversation they had before Helen left still echoed in her mind. "Don't go out of anger or vengeance, daughter. Go for yourself, to find your own answers." The 5th floor was different from the others, quieter, with nurses moving discreetly between rooms. Anthony led her to a door where a sign indicated the number 507. "He's being well cared for. I hired private nurses to take shifts every 12 hours, explained Anthony before opening the door. "Are you sure you want to enter?" Helen took a deep breath and nodded. The room was spacious and impersonally comfortable, with sophisticated medical equipment surrounding a bed where a middle-aged man rested, connected to tubes and monitors. Helen approached slowly, feeling her legs tremble. So, there he was, Edward Davis, her father, the man who had abandoned her before she could even form any memory of him. There were a few similarities between them, the shape of the chin, the thick eyebrows. He seemed older than his 47 years, with graying hair at the temples and deep lines around his closed eyes. "How long has he been like this?" asked Helen, her voice almost a whisper. 6 days, The doctors say the next few days will be decisive. Helen stood there, observing the gentle movement of Edward's chest rising and falling with the help of the machines. What would she say to him if he could hear? That she hated him for abandoning her? That she had grown up imagining what it would be like to have a father? That despite everything, a part of her had always waited for the day he would appear at their door remorseful? Does he have family? I mean, besides me, she asked, without taking her eyes off the unconscious man. No. After the divorce from Cecilia, Edward immersed himself in work. He built a real estate empire but lived practically alone. I am his uncle, his mother's brother. I've been managing the business with him for a few years. Helen felt a confused mixture of emotions. She had imagined her father living a perfect life with another family, perhaps with half-siblings who had received all the love that had been denied to her. The reality of a lonely man, materially successful but emotionally isolated, didn't fit the narrative she had constructed over the years. Why did he never seek us out? The question came out before she could contain it. Anthony sat in an armchair beside the bed. Edward made a terrible mistake when he was young. He was scared of the responsibility, let himself be influenced by Cecilia's family, who was powerful in the region. When he finally realized his mistake, he thought it was too late, that you would be better off without him. And the more time passed, the harder it became to take the initiative. So he preferred to ignore us? Helen felt the anger grow. While my mother worked herself to death to raise me? He tried to help financially several times. Anthony seemed uncomfortable. Your mother never told you? Helen felt as if she had been slapped. What are you talking about? Edward sent money regularly in the early years. Your mother returned all the checks, torn up. Later, he tried to create an account for you for your studies. Lisa threatened to sue him if he continued. She wanted nothing from him, just to be left in peace. The revelation hit Helen like a thunderbolt. Why had her mother never mentioned this? For years, she had built an image of a father who had simply abandoned them to their own fate, without looking back. The idea that there had been attempts at contact, even if only financial, shook the foundations of her carefully cultivated anger. I don't believe you. Helen crossed her arms defensively. Anthony sighed, tired. In Edward's office, there's a folder with copies of all the returned checks, the unanswered letters. He kept everything. I'm not trying to justify what he did, Helen. The initial abandonment was real and unforgivable, but the complete story is more complicated than you imagine. Helen looked again at the man in the bed, now with tears in her eyes. Her entire life had been built on a partial version of the truth. What else didn't she know? I need some air. Helen headed for the door. I'll come back another day. Helen, Anthony called when she was already at the door. Regardless of what you decide about your relationship with Edward, the envelope I gave you contains important documents. Your father arranged everything so that you have access to the resources you need for your studies and for your mother's treatment. Don't reject this out of pride or anger. Helen left without responding, her heart heavy with revelations she didn't know how to process. In the elevator, she opened her bag and finally removed the envelope. As she descended to the lobby, she sat on a secluded bench and with trembling fingers broke the seal. Inside, there were documents that would prove her identity as Edward, Davis's legitimate daughter, as well as papers indicating that a bank account had already been opened in her name, with an amount that made her eyes widen: $5 million. There was also a handwritten letter, dated 3 weeks earlier. With her heart pounding, Helen began to read. Dear Helen, if you are reading this, it is because I finally found the courage to do what I should have done more than 20 years ago. Publicly acknowledge you as my daughter and ask your forgiveness. All because cowardice accompanied me to the end, and only after my collapse did Anthony fulfill my request to seek you out. There are no justifications for what I did. I was young, but not that young. I was scared, but not more than your mother must have been. I chose the easy path, and because of that, I lost the chance to see you grow up, to hear your first words, to watch your first steps. The money I leave. You is not an attempt to buy your forgiveness or your affection. It is simply what has always been rightfully yours. Use it to fulfill your dreams, to take care of Lisa, to build the life you deserve. If I am still alive when you read this letter, and if in your heart there is room to know this old fool who is your father, nothing would make me happier. If it is not possible, I will understand. Some decisions cannot be undone, and I learned this in the most painful way. With love, even if you doubt it, Edward. Tears were now flowing freely down Helen's face. The letter seemed sincere, the remorse genuine. But how to forgive 2 decades of absence? How to process the information that her mother, out of pride or hurt, had refused help that could have made their lives less difficult? Helen put away the documents and left the hospital. She needed to think, to sort out her feelings, to decide the next step. As she walked along the busy streets of New York City, she felt her cell phone vibrate in her pocket. It was a message from her mother. "Did he look for you? Anthony called me saying you went to the hospital." Helen stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling a wave of anger. Her mother knew she would go, perhaps even expected it. She quickly typed, "Why did you never tell me that he tried to help us financially, that you refused his money all these years?" The response took a few minutes to arrive. "Because it wasn't just money we needed from him, daughter. It was presence, it was love, it was responsibility. Accepting those checks would be like saying it was okay for him to have abandoned us, as long as he paid for it." Helen sat on a park bench, reflecting on her mother's words. There was logic in that wounded pride, but there were also consequences. Years of financial difficulties, Lisa's health deteriorating for lack of adequate treatment, the limitations Helen had faced due to lack of resources. When she returned to the small apartment, Helen found Roberta preparing instant noodles for lunch. "So, how did it go?" asked her roommate, concerned when she saw Helen's red eyes. "Complicated." Helen dropped onto the small sofa. "I discovered that the story is not exactly as my mother told me. My father tried to help us financially, but she refused." Roberta sat beside her. "And does that change how you feel about him?" "I don't know." Helen stared at the ceiling, confused. "He still abandoned us. He still chose another woman over my mother. He still deprived me of having a father. But now there are nuances. Life is rarely black and white, right?" Roberta offered an understanding smile. "What will you do now?" Helen took the envelope again, staring at the documents that would make her a millionaire overnight. "First, I'm going to ensure my mother gets the best possible treatment. After that, I don't know. Part of me wants to meet him, to understand who this man is. Another part is afraid of lowering my guard and then discovering it's not worth it." "You have time to decide." Roberta squeezed her shoulder in solidarity, but time was precisely what might be running out for Edward Davis. While savoring the instant noodles with Roberta, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the motionless man in that hospital bed, connected to tubes and machines, and about how many questions would remain unanswered if he passed away without them having really met. That night, she called her mother. The conversation was difficult, with tears on both sides. Lisa finally revealed the whole story. Edward's initial fear, the pressure from Cecilia's family, the broken promises, the frustrated attempts at reconciliation years later. "Why did you never tell me this, Mom?" "Because I feared you would seek him out and be disappointed again." Lisa's voice was choked with emotion. "Or worse, that he would reject you again. I wanted to protect you. It wasn't your decision to make alone." Helen felt the hurt grow. "I had the right to know." "You're right." Lisa sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "I made mistakes trying to protect you. Perhaps without realizing it, I allowed my hurt to influence our lives more than it should have." The sincere admission disarmed Helen. Her mother, always so strong and decisive, rarely admitted mistakes. "I'm going to schedule an appointment with a cardiologist for you here in New York City." Helen changed the subject. "The best I can find." "With what money, daughter?" Lisa sounded concerned. "Edward opened an account for me. There's enough money for your treatment and much more." There was a prolonged silence. "And you'll accept it? After all these years?" Helen closed her eyes, remembering the letter, The unconscious man in the hospital, the revelations of that day. I will. Not for him, but for us. For you. Helen took a deep breath before continuing. And I'm also going to meet him, Mom. If he survives. I need to do this for myself. Lisa's response came after a moment of reflection. Then do it, my daughter. And whatever your decision afterward, I'll be here to support you. As she hung up, Helen felt as if a weight had been partially removed from her shoulders. There was a long road ahead, full of complex emotions and difficult decisions, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she was taking the reins of her own story, not just following the script written by others. The next morning, before even heading to the university to finalize her enrollment, Helen returned to Mount Sinai Hospital. This time she entered room 507 with more firmness in her step, determined to face the man who was her father, whether to forgive him or to finally close that chapter of her life. However, upon entering the room, she immediately noticed that something had changed. The machines emitted different sounds, and there was an unusual movement of nurses. And when she approached the bed, she saw that Edward Davis's eyes were open, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and what seemed to be a flicker of recognition. Helen? His voice was hoarse, almost inaudible, but laden with emotion. Is it really you? Helen, repeated Edward, his voice weak as his eyes scanned the young woman's face. You came... Helen remained paralyzed, unable to process the whirlwind of emotions that invaded her. For years she had imagined this moment, creating imaginary dialogues where she poured out all her hurt. Now, faced with the frail man in the hospital bed, the words simply wouldn't come. I'll call the doctor, said a nurse, quickly leaving the room. How long? Edward tried to adjust himself, but weakness prevented him. You look so much like your mother. Sir, you don't even know me, Helen finally responded, her voice controlled despite the tremor in her hands. You don't know what I'm like. Edward closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing the impact of those words. You're right, I don't have that right. The doctor entered the room, interrupting the moment. After examining Edward, he explained that the awakening was a positive sign, but that the patient needed absolute rest. Only brief visits for now, he instructed, looking at Helen. Are you a relative? I'm his daughter, she replied, feeling the weight of those words for the first time. When the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Helen approached the window, observing the city she barely knew stretching to the horizon. Why did you want to see me? She asked without turning around. Because it's the only thing I truly regret in life, Edward's voice sounded firmer now. Abandoning you and your mother. Helen turned, facing him. And you only realized this when you thought you might die? No. Edward held her gaze. I realized it much earlier. I just didn't have the courage to face what I had done. Anthony entered the room at that moment, surprised to see his nephew awake. After a brief moment of emotion, he noticed the tension between father and daughter. Perhaps it would be better to talk another day when Edward is stronger, he suggested. No, Edward protested, slightly extending his hand toward Helen. Please, stay a little longer. Helen hesitated, torn between the desire to flee and the curiosity that consumed her. I need to go to the university, she finally replied. I have to finalize my enrollment. Will you come back? The vulnerability in Edward's voice was palpable. Helen looked at the man who was biologically her father, but who emotionally was a complete stranger. Maybe, was all she could say before leaving. At the university, Helen completed the bureaucratic procedures like an automaton. Her mind was in the hospital room, in the words exchanged, in the decades of absence condensed into minutes of conversation. You seem miles away, commented Roberta when they met for lunch in the university cafeteria. My father woke up, Helen revealed, distractedly playing with her food. We talked, or tried to. And how was it? Strange, like talking to a stranger who should be familiar. Helen put down her fork. He said he regrets having abandoned us. Do you believe him? I don't know. I want to believe. And at the same time, I'm afraid to believe and be disappointed again. When she returned to the apartment late in the afternoon, Helen found a message from Anthony informing her that Edward had been transferred to a recovery room and that the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. During the following week, Helen immersed herself in preparations for the start of classes. She bought books, now being able to choose new editions instead of the used ones she always had to buy, organized her small space in the apartment, and tried not to think about the hospital or the man waiting for her there. But on Sunday, a week after Edward's awakening, Helen found herself again at Mount Sinai Hospital. This time, Anthony was waiting for her in the reception. "He asks about you every day," he commented as they rode the elevator. "How is he?" "Improving rapidly. The doctors say it was a miracle there were no serious neurological sequelae." Anthony paused. "He's changed a lot since he saw you, Helen. There's a determination in him I haven't seen in years." The new room was smaller but more welcoming. When they entered, they found Edward sitting in an armchair near the window, wearing a robe over his hospital pajamas. He seemed stronger, though still visibly weakened. "Helen?" His face lit up. "I thought you wouldn't come back." "I came to see how you're doing," she replied, maintaining her distance. "Please don't call me sir," Edward indicated the nearby chair. "Will you sit down?" Helen nodded, noticing that Anthony discreetly left the room to give them privacy. "How are the preparations for college?" asked Edward. "How do you know about that?" Anthony told me. "Business administration, right?" There was genuine pride in his voice. "I always liked the field, too." "I can see that," Helen commented dryly, indicating with a gesture the panoramic window that showed several commercial buildings. "Davis Properties seems successful." Edward sighed. "Money was never a problem, it's true, but there are other forms of poverty that took me too long to recognize." The silence that followed was interrupted by a nurse bringing medications. After she left, Edward resumed. "Your mother, how is she?" The question caught Helen by surprise. In all the times she had imagined a reunion with her father, she never thought he would ask about Lisa. "She needs heart surgery." "She always has, but we never had the means." Edward closed his eyes, visibly shaken. "That's why she refused help? Out of pride, I deprived you both of so many things." "It wasn't just pride," Helen defended her mother, surprising herself. "It was dignity. You abandoned us. The least you could do was take responsibility, not just send checks." "You're right." Edward looked directly at her. "But now, I want to do more than send money. I want to get to know you, Helen. I want to help your mother too, if she'll allow it." "Why? Why now and not 5, 10, or 20 years ago?" Edward stood up with effort and walked slowly to the window. "Because I'm a coward who needed to face death to realize I was wasting the only thing that really matters, the chance to know my daughter." The sincerity in his voice touched Helen more deeply than she would have liked to admit. Part of her wanted to continue protecting herself behind the wall of resentment she had built over the years. Another part, however, yearned for answers, for connection, for understanding her own origins. "You said you didn't stay with Cecilia," Helen changed the subject. "Why not?" Edward sat down again, visibly tired. "Because our marriage was doomed from the start. It was an arrangement between families, not a relationship of love." Edward paused. "Unlike what I felt for your mother." "You loved my mother?" Helen couldn't hide her disbelief, more than she would ever believe now. Edward smiled sadly. "Lisa is an extraordinary woman, independent, talented, determined. It scared me at the time. I was a spoiled young man, used to having everything without effort. So you abandoned her because she was too strong for you?" "No. I abandoned her because I was too weak for her," Edward admitted. "When she got pregnant, I panicked. My parents pressured me to solve the problem discreetly. Cecilia's family offered security, social position, a proper future. I made the wrong choice and paid for it every day since then." Helen felt tears forming, but contained them. "That doesn't change the past." "No, it doesn't," Edward agreed. "But perhaps it can influence the future. Our future, if you give me a chance." Before Helen could respond, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Roberta, reminding her about the Orientation meeting for freshmen that would take place in an hour. I need to go. Helen stood up. I have a commitment at the university. I understand. The disappointment was visible on Edward's face. Will you come back? Helen hesitated. Each visit opened more doors to a relationship she didn't know if she wanted or should. Wentian, each conversation dismantled a little of the monster father image she had constructed to protect herself. Maybe. That was her response, the same as her first visit. Helen, called Edward when she was already at the door. Your grandparents, my parents, would like to meet you. The information caught her off guard. I have grandparents. Yes, they live on a farm in Westchester County. They're elderly now, but lucid. They don't know about you, another mistake of mine. Helen felt a wave of renewed anger. You hid my existence even from your own parents? In the beginning, yes. Edward didn't try to defend himself. Later, when I tried to tell them, it seemed too late. One more act of cowardice on my part. Helen left without responding, her heart heavy with this new revelation. At the university, she participated in the freshman meeting with half her attention, her mind divided between the present she was trying to build and the past that insisted on resurfacing. After the meeting, as she left campus, Helen was surprised to find Anthony waiting for her at the gate. Sorry to show up like this, he said, but I thought it important to talk to you away from the hospital. About what? Anthony indicated a nearby cafe. Reluctantly, Helen followed him. Edward has a proposal for you, Anthony began after they sat down. He didn't want to mention it today because he feared you would misinterpret his intentions. What kind of proposal? Helen asked, suspicious. He wants you to get to know the company, Davis Properties. Anthony seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Not as an employee or heiress, although you are legally that now, but as someone who is studying business administration and could benefit from direct contact with a large corporation. Helen remained silent, processing the information. Why didn't he tell me this directly? Because he fears you'll think he's trying to buy you with professional opportunities. Anthony smiled slightly, which, knowing Edward, is probably a little true. But it's also genuine, he really believes it. Could be a valuable experience for your education. And what would I gain from this? Practical experience in one of the largest real estate developers in the country, contacts in the market, a line on your resume that would open doors anywhere. Anthony took a sip of coffee before continuing. And perhaps, just perhaps, the chance to get to know your father better in an environment where he feels confident, in his element. Helen reflected on the proposal. It was tempting from a professional point of view, but frightening from an emotional one. Can I think about it? Of course. Anthony slid a card across the table. This is my direct contact. When you decide, let me know. That night, Helen called her mother. The conversation was long and difficult, with Lisa initially resistant to the idea of accepting any medical help coming indirectly from Edward. Mom, don't be stubborn, Helen argued. Your health is more important than pride now. It's not just pride, daughter, it's about dignity. For 22 years, I've taken care of both of us without his help. And you've paid a high price for it. Your health, for example. Helen took a deep breath. He wants to help now. Why not let him? A prolonged silence followed. Have you forgiven him? Lisa finally asked. I don't know, Helen was honest. I'm trying to understand who he is before deciding whether I forgive him or not. And who is he? A complicated man. Remorseful, it seems. Lonely, definitely. Helen paused. He talked about you. What did he say? Lisa's curiosity was palpable, even through the phone. That he loved you. That you were too strong for the weak man he was. Another silence, this one filled with contained emotion. He always knew how to use words, Lisa finally commented, but without the usual bitterness. When she hung up, Helen found herself staring at the card Anthony had given her. A decision needed to be made, not just about the professional proposal, but about what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted to build with Edward Davis. The next morning, classes began. Helen immersed herself in the new academic routine, trying to focus on studies and not on the family complications that were arising. But on the third night, after finishing a reading for the next day, she picked up the phone and called Anthony. "I accept getting to know the company," she announced, "but with one condition." "Which is?" "I want my mother to come to New York. I want her to have the best cardiac treatment possible at the best clinic in the city, and I want Edward to arrange all of this personally, not through intermediaries or assistants." There was a moment of silence, then Anthony responded, "I'm sure he'll be happy to meet your request." "It's not a request," corrected Helen, "it's a condition." When she hung up, Helen felt a strange mixture of anxiety and relief. She was taking a step toward this man who was her biological father, testing not only his sincerity, but also herself and her ability to make room in her life for him. What she didn't know yet was that this step would lead her to discover secrets much deeper than she imagined, secrets that connected her mother, her father, and her entire existence in ways she could never have predicted. 2 weeks later, the taxi parked in front of the elegant glass and concrete building in the financial heart of New York City. Davis Properties gleamed in metallic letters on the imposing facade. Helen took a deep breath before exiting the vehicle. At the reception, she was greeted with unusual deference. "Miss Davis, welcome," the receptionist smiled. "Mr. Anthony is waiting for you on the 25th floor." Miss Davis, the surname she had, never used, sounded strange. Throughout her life, she had been Helen Miller, daughter of Lisa, the respected but single seamstress from Aspen. Now, suddenly, she was a Davis, a surname that opened doors and inspired reverence. In the panoramic elevator, she observed the city becoming smaller as she ascended. It was an apt metaphor for how she felt, rising above the life she knew toward the unknown. Anthony was waiting for her in the corridor. "Thank you for coming." He led her down a corridor with glass walls. "Edward will be released from the hospital tomorrow, but he insisted that you visit the company today. He said he didn't want your presence here to be overshadowed by his." "He thought of that?" Helen couldn't hide her surprise. "Your father is more perceptive than he appears," Anthony smiled, "especially since the stroke." The tour of the company revealed an impressive operation. Departments of architecture, engineering, marketing, sales, legal, and finance occupied 3 entire floors. Helen observed everything with critical and curious eyes, asking pertinent questions that seemed to positively surprise Anthony and the managers who accompanied them in each sector. At the end, they went to a meeting room on the top floor with a panoramic view of the city. "What did you think?" asked Anthony as coffee was served. "It's bigger than I imagined." Helen carefully examined her cup. "And it seems well structured. It was built from the ground up by your father." Anthony sat across from her. "He started with small developments in towns upstate. Today we have projects in 5 states. Helen absorbed the information in silence. "And where exactly would I fit into all this?" she finally asked. "Wherever you want." Anthony leaned slightly forward. "Edward suggests that you start with a personalized program, spending a few hours a week in different departments, a kind of rotating internship that would give you a complete view of the operation." "Wouldn't that be favoritism?" "If you were just an employee's daughter, yes, but you are the legal heir to the company." Anthony smiled. "Knowing all operations isn't favoritism, it's responsibility." Helen looked away to the city below. Accepting that position would mean publicly acknowledging her connection to Edward. It would mean integrating into a world that had never been part of hers. "My mother arrives tomorrow," she commented, changing the subject. "Has Edward fulfilled his part?" "Completely." Anthony nodded. "Lisa has an appointment scheduled with Dr. Silverman, one of the best cardiologists in the country, on Thursday. She's staying in the flat next to your apartment, as you requested." Helen felt a wave of relief. The first test had been passed. "I still haven't given my final answer about working here." "I understand." Anthony stood up. "But there's something I need to show you before you decide." He led her to a side corridor that ended in a simple door, different from the glass doors predominant in the rest of the floor. "This is Edward's private office." Anthony unlocked the door. "He specifically asked me to show you this." The office was surprisingly modest compared to the rest of the building. A dark wood desk, bookshelves, some abstract paintings on the walls. What caught Helen's attention, however, was a small side shelf filled with picture frames. Approaching, she felt her heart race. They were photos of her, dozens of them from baby to adolescence, including school graduations, ballet presentations, math competitions. How? Helen picked up one of the frames, unable to complete the question. Edward hired private investigators over the years, Anthony explained calmly. Not to interfere in your life, just to know how you were growing up. Helen felt her legs weaken. Anne sat in the nearest chair, still holding the photo where she appeared at age 10, receiving a medal from a math Olympiad. He watched my life from a distance? It was the only way he found to participate, even if indirectly. Anthony indicated the shelf. Each of your achievements was celebrated here. Helen didn't know whether to feel comforted or invaded. The idea of having been observed from a distance, photographed without knowing, was disturbing. At the same time, there was something painfully moving about that improvised sanctuary. Why did he never appear in person? She asked, returning the photo to the shelf. Out of fear, of being rejected by you, of causing more pain to Lisa, of facing the consequences of his initial cowardice. Anthony sat across from her. Edward is a complicated man, Helen. Brilliant in business, disastrous in relationships, the type of person who built an empire but couldn't build a family. Helen continued observing the photos, trying to process this new dimension of her father. The man who had abandoned her, but kept every fragment of her existence. The paradox was difficult to reconcile. There's one more thing you should know. Anthony opened a drawer in the desk and removed a folder. Edward has maintained an account for you since your birth. Every month for 22 years he deposited a significant amount. The money you received recently is just a fraction of the total accumulated. Helen opened the folder, finding bank statements organized chronologically. The final sum was so astronomical it seemed unreal. Why so much money? Because it's all he knew how to give. Anthony gently closed the folder. I'm not defending him, just explaining. Edward transformed guilt into money, success into compensation. It's an emotionally bankrupt equation, but it's how he dealt with the situation. When she left the building hours later, Helen felt mentally exhausted. Walking through the busy streets of the financial center, she tried to organize her thoughts. The image she had of Edward was becoming more complex with each new element. The absent father was now also the distant observer, the silent provider, the penitent without courage. The next day, Lisa arrived in New York City. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, with tight hugs and barely contained tears. "Is this place yours?" asked Lisa, impressed with the modern and well-furnished flat. "It's rented, but yes." Helen helped her mother with the suitcase. "Edward arranged everything as I promised." Lisa sat on the sofa, visibly tired from the journey. "How is he?" "Being discharged today." Helen served a glass of water to her mother. "Do you want to see him?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. "I don't know, daughter," Lisa sighed. "Part of me wants to turn my back and forget he exists. Another part is curious," Helen completed. "Maybe." Lisa drank the water slowly. 22. Years is a long time. And enough to build an empire. Helen sat beside her mother. "I visited the company yesterday. It's impressive." He was always ambitious. A slight smile appeared on Lisa's face. "When we met, he talked about building buildings that would change the skyline of cities. I thought it was just talk from a dreamy young man." It was rare for Lisa to speak about the past with Edward without bitterness. Helen took advantage of the opening. "How did you two meet?" Lisa adjusted herself on the sofa, her eyes fixed on a distant point as if looking at the past. "I worked in a fashion designer's studio in New York City before opening my own business. Edward came in to order a suit for a graduation party." Lisa smiled at the memory. He was so awkward back then, so different from the rich and arrogant young men who usually frequented the place. "Was it love at first sight?" Helen asked, fascinated by this glimpse of a past she didn't know. "On my part, no," Lisa laughed. "I thought he was presumptuous, but he came back several times, inventing unnecessary adjustments to the suit just to see me. He was persistent. And when did you give in? When I saw him helping an elderly lady who had fallen on the sidewalk in front of the studio, Lisa became serious. He not only helped her up, but accompanied her home, carrying her bags. He returned an hour later, all wet from the rain. At that moment, I saw something in him beyond the rich student. Helen absorbed that story, trying to reconcile the gentle young man in her mother's narrative with the man who would later abandon them. What went wrong, Mom? Real life interfered with the romance. Lisa became serious. When I got pregnant, his family panicked. The Davis family had other plans for the heir, which did not include a seamstress without pedigree. Did you love him? The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Yes, Lisa finally admitted, and that's why it hurt so much when he chose the easier path. That afternoon, while Lisa rested, Helen received a message from Anthony informing her that Edward had been discharged and was in his penthouse in the Upper East Side. He asked to see her if possible. After hesitating for a long time, Helen decided to go. The address led her to one of the most luxurious buildings in the city. In the private elevator to the penthouse, she again felt that sensation of entering a world that wasn't hers. Edward opened the door personally, still visibly debilitated, leaning slightly on a cane. Helen. The relief in his voice was palpable. I didn't know if you would come. Neither did I. She entered, observing the spacious and elegantly decorated apartment. Did your mother arrive safely? Edward asked, as he led her to the large living room. With floor-to-ceiling windows. Yes, she's resting now. And the appointment is confirmed for Thursday. Dr. Silverman is excellent. He'll take good care of her. An uncomfortable silence followed. Helen observed the city below, feeling the weight of the decision she needed to make. I saw your office yesterday, she finally said. The photos. Edward seemed momentarily embarrassed. I should have been present, not just collecting moments. From a distance. One more failure of mine. Why did you never try a real approach? Helen turned to face him. Even after you separated from Cecilia. Edward sat heavily in an armchair. With each passing year it became more difficult. The abyss between us grew. And there was something else. Something not even Anthony knows. Helen waited, feeling she was about to hear something important. After separating from Cecilia, I sought out Lisa secretly. Edward looked at his own hands. I went to Aspen, observed you two from a distance for days. You must have been about 8 years old. Helen felt her heart race. And why didn't you approach? Because I saw how happy you were together. Edward's voice faltered. You were a bright, smiling child. Lisa had built a stable life for you against all odds. I feared that my sudden appearance would destroy that balance. It wasn't your decision to make. No, it wasn't, Edward agreed. It was one more cowardice disguised as consideration. I convinced myself I was being altruistic, when in fact I was just afraid. Helen processed the information in silence. The image she was forming of Edward became more complex with each new revelation. Anthony showed me the rotating internship proposal. She deliberately changed the subject. Why do you want me to know the company so badly? Because it's rightfully yours. Edward raised his gaze. And because, perhaps, selfishly, I want to share with you the only thing I did right in my life. The sincerity of the response disarmed her. I accept the proposal, Helen announced. I'll start next week, after my mother is settled and with the treatment underway. Edward's face lit up with a genuine smile. Thank you for the opportunity, Helen. I'm not doing this for you, she was direct. I'm doing it for myself, for the professional experience. I understand, and I respect that. When Helen was about to leave, Edward called her again. Helen, there's one more thing. He seemed hesitant. Your grandparents, my parents, would very much like to meet you. They're coming to New York City this weekend. Helen felt a wave of anxiety. Did you tell them about me? Yes, it was a difficult conversation. Edward sighed. First they didn't believe it, then they were furious with me for having hidden your existence for so long. Now they're anxious to meet their granddaughter. And if I don't want to meet them? That will be respected, obviously, Edward responded. But they're not responsible for my failures, Helen. In fact, if they had known about you from the beginning, perhaps things would have been different. On the way back to the apartment, Helen felt as if she were assembling a complex puzzle. Each new encounter with Edward added pieces to the image, making it simultaneously clearer and more complicated. Upon arriving home, she found Lisa awake, leafing through an old photo album she had brought from Aspen. I was reminiscing about your childhood. Lisa smiled, making room for her daughter to sit beside her. You were always determined, even as a young child. Helen looked at a photo where she appeared at about 5 years old, her face concentrated as she assembled a puzzle. Mom, did you know that Edward went to Aspen when I was 8 years old? That he observed us from a distance? The smile disappeared from Lisa's face. I knew. The response completely surprised Helen. How? I saw him. Lisa slowly closed the album. He wasn't as discreet as he thought. I noticed his presence on the 3rd day. And you didn't say anything? You didn't confront him? No. Lisa sighed deeply. Because at that moment I understood that, despite everything, he cared enough to come see how we were doing. And because I was afraid of what his presence could mean for our life. You feared he might try to take me away from you? Lisa nodded silently. Is that why you rejected all the money? Out of fear that he could use it as an argument to obtain custody? Partially, Lisa admitted, and also out of pride. I can't deny it. Helen tried to process this new revelation. Her mother, always so frank, had hidden something so significant for years. What else don't I know, Mom? Lisa looked directly into her daughter's eyes. There is one thing, something that not even Edward knows, something I've kept all these years because I thought it would be better for everyone. At that moment the intercom rang. It was Roberta returning from the university. The conversation was interrupted, but Helen could feel the weight of the unrevealed secret in her mother's gaze. What truth could be so important that Lisa, the most honest woman she knew, had kept it hidden for more than 2 decades? On the morning of the medical appointment, Helen accompanied her mother to the private clinic in the Upper West Side. The luxurious reception, with leather armchairs and artwork on the walls, contrasted drastically with the public hospitals, where Lisa had always been treated. It looks like a 5-star hotel, not a hospital, commented Lisa, visibly uncomfortable with so much luxury. Dr. Silverman, a gentleman with graying hair and gentle manners, examined Lisa thoroughly. After a complete battery of tests, his diagnosis was direct. You need surgery to replace the mitral valve. There's no way to avoid it any longer. And what are the risks? Asked Helen, holding her mother's hand. Like any cardiac procedure, there are risks. But your chances are excellent, especially with our team. The doctor smiled reassuringly. The riskiest thing would be to continue postponing it. As they left the clinic, Helen noticed that her mother was unusually silent. What are you thinking? About, Mom? The irony of life. Lisa looked at the grey sky of New York City. For years I refused help from Edward to preserve my independence. Now I depend on him to stay alive. You're not depending on him. I'm using resources that are legally mine, which come from him in the end. Lisa sighed. Life has strange ways of closing circles. At the restaurant where they had lunch, Helen couldn't stop, thinking about the interrupted conversation from the night before. What were you going to tell me before Roberta arrived? She finally asked, after the waiter served coffee. Lisa stirred her cup slowly, avoiding looking directly at her daughter. Perhaps this isn't the moment. Mom, please, I'm discovering so many things about my past lately. I need to know what else there is. Lisa put the cup on the saucer and took a deep breath. Edward didn't leave exactly as I told you, she began. Or rather, he did, but he tried to come back. Helen felt her heart race. What do you mean? When you were about a year old, he appeared at our home. He had married Cecilia, but said he was unhappy. He wanted us to form a family in some way. And you refused? Yes. Lisa met her daughter's eyes. Because he was still married, Because he seemed to want everything, the security of the arranged marriage and the passion we had. Because I didn't want to be the other woman, nor did I want that life for you. Did he want to acknowledge me? Yes, he proposed giving you his surname, paying official child support, participating in your upbringing. Lisa paused, but without leaving Cecilia. At least not at that moment. Helen processed the information in silence. It was a different version of the story she had always believed, where Edward had simply abandoned them without looking back. Why did you never tell me this? Because it was easier for you to believe that he completely abandoned us than to know that he wanted a half presence, a half family. Lisa held her daughter's hand. And because I feared that, if you knew, you might blame me for pushing him away. I would never. You were a child who grew up without a father. It would be natural to eventually question my decisions. Lisa smiled sadly. I preferred to carry this burden alone. Is there anything else I should know? Lisa, visibly, hesitated. Yes, the reason why I really fled to Aspen. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to the procedure, Helen divided herself between university classes, the beginning of her rotating internship at Davis Properties, and supporting her mother. The meeting with her paternal grandparents was postponed at Edward's suggestion, who perceived the stress of the situation. On the eve of the surgery, Helen went to dinner at Edward's penthouse. Anthony was also present, creating a less intimate and consequently less uncomfortable environment. I wanted to personally thank you for everything you're doing for Lisa. Edward served wine for everyone except himself, following medical restrictions. Dr. Silverman assured me that the surgery has a very high chance of success. As I said before, I'm not doing this for you. Helen took a sip of wine. It's for my mother. I understand perfectly. Edward nodded. Still, I am grateful. The meal proceeded with superficial conversations about the university and Helen's initial impressions of the company. Only at the end of dinner, when Anthony discreetly withdrew to make some calls, did Edward address a more personal subject. Helen, I discovered something today that I believe you should know. She looked up, apprehensive. I received a call from an old lawyer of the Davis family. Edward seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Apparently my parents always knew about you. Helen felt her blood freeze. What do you mean? My father hired investigators when you were born. They confirmed your existence and discreetly followed your growth. But you said they didn't know. I didn't know that they knew, Edward explained. They kept it a secret, even from me. Apparently they established a trust fund in your name, since then independent of the deposits I was making. Helen tried to process this new information. Her grandparents, people she had never met, had silently acknowledged her existence for more than 2 decades. Why are they revealing this now? The lawyer says my father always intended to tell when you turned 25. My stroke just accelerated the plans. Edward seemed genuinely surprised by all this. It seems I'm not the only Davis keeping secrets. In the early hours of the following day, Helen anxiously waited in the hospital corridor while Lisa was prepared for surgery. At 5:30 a.m., the nurses came to take her to the operating room. I'll be here when you wake up, Mom. Helen kissed her mother's forehead. Everything will be fine. If something happens to me, Lisa held her daughter's hand tightly. Nothing will happen, you'll be fine. But if it does, Lisa insisted, there's a letter at the bottom of my suitcase. Promise you'll only read it if necessary. Helen nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. The Wham! Next 7 hours were the longest of Helen's life. To her surprise, Edward appeared in the waiting room around noon, bringing coffee and sandwiches. I thought you might be hungry. He timidly offered the snack. May I wait with you? Helen accepted with a nod. During the next hour, they remained in silence, united by a common concern. When Dr. Silverman finally appeared, both jumped to their feet. The surgery was a success. The doctor smiled. Lisa is a strong woman. She's in recovery now, should wake up from the anesthesia in the next few hours. The relief was so intense that Helen felt her legs weaken. Surprisingly, it was Edward who supported her. She'll be fine, he repeated, as if to convince them both. Lisa was always a fighter. Only when Lisa was transferred to a room and Helen could confirm for herself that her mother was out of danger, did she allow herself to return to the apartment for a quick shower. In the rush to get back to the hospital, she almost forgot her phone, which she had left charging. When she picked it up, she noticed a message from Anthony. "Edward fainted after leaving the hospital. He's being attended to. Don't worry, it seems to be just exhaustion." Helen felt an internal conflict. Her mother needed her, but Edward also seemed vulnerable. After a moment of hesitation, she responded, asking Anthony to keep her informed, and headed back to the hospital. The next day, with Lisa already conscious and recovering well, Helen finally had the courage to ask about the secret her mother had started to reveal at the restaurant. "You mentioned that there was another reason why we went to Aspen." Helen sat on the edge of the hospital bed. "What was it?" Lisa, still, pale and tired from the surgery, held her daughter's hand. "Cecilia's family." Her voice was weak but determined. "They threatened me." "What do you mean?" "Cecilia's father was a powerful man, with political connections." Lisa breathed slowly, conserving energy. "When Edward tried to reconnect with us, even while married to Cecilia, her father became furious." "What did he do?" "He sent some men to visit me." Lisa's eyes became distant with the memory. "They said if I continued allowing Edward to visit us, they would ensure I lost custody of you." Helen felt a chill. "Could they do that? With the power and money they had?" "Probably." Lisa sighed. "So I took what little we had and fled to Aspen, where your Aunt Martha lived." I started from scratch again. "And Edward, did he know about these threats?" "No, I never told him." Lisa briefly closed her eyes. "I feared he would try to intervene and make things worse. Or worse, that he wouldn't believe me." Helen sat in silence, processing this new layer of the family history. Everyone had been manipulated in a way. She, her mother, even Edward. "Edward's parents knew about me all along." Helen shared her own revelation. "Apparently they followed my life from a distance, like Edward." A sad smile appeared on Lisa's tired face. The Davis family was always good at observing from afar, but not at actually getting involved. 3 days later, with Lisa recovering well, Helen finally managed to visit Edward in his penthouse. She found him more debilitated than she expected, which worried her. The doctors say it was just stress and exhaustion. Edward minimized, indicating that she sit down. "How is Lisa?" "Recovering well. She'll be discharged in a few days." "I'm glad." Edward smiled genuinely. "She deserves to be healthy and happy." Helen studied the man before her, noticing new signs of fragility that she hadn't noticed before. "I heard your parents arrive tomorrow." "Yes." Edward seemed nervous. "They're anxious to meet you if you're still willing." "I am." Helen surprised herself with the response. "Mom told me about the threats she received from Cecilia's family." Edward visibly paled. "What threats?" Helen related what Lisa had revealed. With each word, Edward's face showed more shock and pain. "I never knew," he murmured when she finished. "When Lisa disappeared with you, I thought it was a definitive rejection of me, not a flight for protection." "No one had the complete story," Helen concluded. "We all saw only parts of the puzzle for all these years." The following afternoon, Helen met her paternal grandparents in Edward's penthouse. August Davis, a tall man in his early 70s, observed her with teary eyes that resembled Edward's. Regina, his wife, hugged Helen for a long time before even formally introducing herself. "You're exactly as we imagined." Regina made no effort to hide her tears. "Forgive us for having been cowards for so long." "We should have confronted Edward, forced a formal acknowledgement," August completed, "but we feared losing him too." During lunch, Helen discovered more pieces of the family puzzle. How the Davis family had discovered her existence through a detective hired to investigate why Edward seemed so depressed after breaking up with Lisa. How they had established a fund for her, but respected Lisa's apparent decision to maintain distance. "We visited Aspen several times over the years," Regina confessed. From a distance we observed you at school or playing in the square. The whole family observing from afar, but no one approaching. Helen couldn't avoid the comment. The Davis family specializes in belated regrets, Edward said bitterly. It seems to be our strongest family trait. Helen's last visit to Edward before resuming her routine of studies and internship happened a week later, when Lisa was already at home recovering well. To her surprise, she found him organizing hundreds of old photos spread over a large table. "What are you doing?" she asked, curious. "Putting together a chronological album of your life." Edward smiled. "For Lisa, I thought she might like to see the moments I documented from a distance, a way to complete her album." Helen sat beside him observing the photographs, her fragmented history captured by absent but attentive eyes. "This doesn't substitute for real presence." "No," Edward agreed. "Nothing substitutes for it, but perhaps it's a beginning for something new." While helping Edward organize the photos, Helen reflected on how in a few weeks her worldview had been completely transformed. The monstrous father had revealed himself to be a complex and fallible man. The heroic mother had shown that she too had her own fragilities and secrets. And Helen herself had discovered layers of her identity that she didn't even know existed. At the end of that afternoon, before leaving, Helen gave Edward a small package. "What is this?" he asked, surprised. "A garment," Helen smiled. "Made by my mother. She taught me to sew when I was 10 years old, and it has been our way of making a living since then." Edward carefully opened the package, finding a delicate petrol blue silk handkerchief with his initials embroidered in one corner. "Actually, I made this one myself," Helen admitted. "It's not perfect, but it's the most precious gift I've ever received." Edward's voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." That night, returning home, Helen thought about how the threads of destiny had intertwined in unexpected ways, how Lisa, with her skillful fingers, had sewn a life for them despite all obstacles, how Edward, in his tortuous way, had tried to stay connected to her, how her grandparents had silently acknowledged her place in the family. Life didn't always offer perfect and tidy endings like her mother's meticulous stitches. Sometimes it was full of loose threads and improvised patches, but it was these same patches that eventually formed the complex and unique fabric of each existence. As she opened the apartment door, Helen decided that perhaps it was time to stop lamenting the tears of the past and start valuing the imperfect but singular fabric that formed her story. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was possible to begin weaving new patterns for the future, not erasing the old scars, but incorporating them into the larger design of a life that finally seemed entirely her own. Next to the phone, she found a message from Roberta. Edward had called, inviting Helen and Lisa for dinner the following week. His parents would also be present. A family reunion, the first in 22 years. The first of many, perhaps. Helen smiled, thinking about how her mother would react to the invitation, about how she herself felt about it, about how life continued to surprise, unfolding like an infinite fabric of possibilities. She picked up the phone to call Lisa. There were decisions to make, threads to sew, stories to continue, and for the first time in a long time, the future seemed like an open design waiting to be embroidered. As Helen closed the diary where she had recorded this entire journey of rediscoveries and reunions, a thought occurred to her. How many stories like hers remained untold? How many families lived their own imperfect stitches, trying to unite patches of complicated pasts? She ran her fingers over the cover of the diary, feeling the textures of the memories she had recorded there. Perhaps sharing her story could help others find courage for their own reunions. Dear readers, just as Helen found meaning in unraveling the invisible lines connecting her family, we hope this narrative has touched something in you. Stories have the power to make us see our own lives in a new light. If this journey of reconciliation and discovery resonated with you, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Subscribe to our channel to receive notifications of new stories that, like this one, explore the complexities of human relationships. Leave your like as a small stitch connecting us, and most importantly, Share your own experiences of reunions and discoveries in the comments. Every week, we bring new narratives carefully embroidered with genuine emotions. Some are already available in the Rekindled Bonds playlist you'll find in the upper corner of the screen. As Lisa taught Helen, the most beautiful stitches are made with patience and dedication, and that's how we build our community of readers and listeners. Don't let this story end here. Join us in this collective tapestry of human stories